Guys, welcome to the First Responder Playbook. I am blessed to have Yogi Mueller with me tonight. He's a leadership coach, speaker, and author of The Great Slapping, a raw and honest book about the power of real mentorship. With over 2 decades of experience designing leadership and talent development programs for major brands like Disney, Yogi brings a direct, real world approach to growth, feedback, and what it truly takes to unlock someone's potential. He is the founder of Craft Leadership and the creator of the Grit Index Assessment, a tool that helps leaders get honest about how they show up and how they grow. His message is simple. If you want to lead well, you have to be willing to take a few hits and maybe deliver a few too. Yogi has been mentored, challenged, and occasionally slapped into better leadership. And today he is here to talk about why mentorship matters more than ever, how to give feedback that actually works, and what it takes to grow grit in a world that often values polish over progress. Please welcome Yogi Mueller.
You, Brent, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, sir.
Yep, absolutely. So let me ask, how did you get into the world of leadership and mentorship?
A great question. I am one of those individuals. A lot of in our business, we kind of fell into the learning and talent development side. When I went to college, there weren't any degrees in learning and development. It wasn't the science it is today in a lot of areas, and I just found myself working with the trainers or the interns or teaching classes that I created kind of in a vacuum, not knowing again that there was this whole industry. And then I worked for Disney for 10 years, and that company helped focus. I mean, they were doing this stuff back in '55, right when Disneyland opened up. So they really helped me focus my passion, my why, and that's where it stuck. So that's kind of fun. It kind of fell into it.
I got to ask, how did you get in the world of Disney, and what was your favorite thing about working for Disney?
So I've always been a fan. My parents, God, we were blessed, and we visited a lot. Since I was 7 and on up. Spent my honeymoon in at Disney, and my wife and I decided. Well, we were living in Milwaukee at the time. Went to Marquette University, and I'm like, well, let's move to Florida. We have no friends or family down there. Let's just go down and work for the mouse. And um, that was it. And I learned a lot. It in some areas it chewed me up and spit me out. And I worked for some great leaders. I worked for some not so great leaders, but I think the entire experience was absolutely invaluable. I tell a lot of stories about my Disney time in the book, and I said, I'll leave the challenging times for the next book. The Great Slapping First Blood. You know, but it was a dream, and I realized it, and it was awesome.
So let me ask you this.
Hmm?
Do you prefer the cold of Wisconsin or the heat of Florida?
Ooh, snow is a nice place to visit, but I'm good in Florida. People go, well, it gets 100 degrees in Florida. Well, I stay inside in the air conditioner. Like when it gets 20 below in Wisconsin, you stay inside in the heat. But I've got 8 months, 7 months of 70-degree weather with blue skies. You have 10 months of cold, miserable gray weather.
Yep. Um, I will say though, I was a big Marquette basketball fan growing up because of Dwayne Wade.
Yep.
Um, so I've always kind of followed Marquette from afar. Obviously, OSU fan, but
Understood.
I always respected Marquette basketball. So I, yep, well, and that probably helps you. I mean, I know you live in Orlando, so they have the Magic, but Dwayne Wade being down in Miami probably didn't hurt being in Florida. So
No, he was just up there recently donating a bunch of stuff back to the college. So it's great when you got a superstar like D Wade and still has mad respect for the school that made him, right? So that's awesome. And it's been a while since we've got the championship '77, but we've got a couple of Final Fours and some Sweet 16s and Elite Eights. So this year's our year. Remember, we heard that earlier. This year's our
yeah,
year.
yeah. I keep telling myself about that in OSU in basketball that eventually we'll get good again. I'm hopeful maybe this year actually is that time. We'll see.
I'm
Not
thinking
gonna
I'm
hold my breath.
thinking OSU Marquette Final Four maybe this year.
Hey, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
So let me ask, how did you decide to go down the route of writing a book? That sometimes seems like a mountain a lot of people are afraid to tackle.
It is. I tell people the hardest part is getting pen to paper. It is. It is. You have all these thoughts in your head. It's just transferring it here to the paper. Is once you get there, it's a little easier. But that first part is hard. I was actually working. I was really happy with an organization for 13 years. I was at that moment. I was the vice president of leadership and talent development, and we got bought out. And as I love to say, they freed me up to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams after that acquisition. And with this newfound time in my hand, I wanted to do something valuable. I wanted to show that I wasn't just laying on the couch or walking the dog or something like that. And I'm like, I'm going to write a book. I've been wanting to do it for a while, and that was the catalyst. That was like, I need to sit down and do it. And it probably took me total, I would say, about 14 months. Most of that was in the editing process. I tell people the writing is sexy, the editing is not. And you get to the point like, my wife, at about 9 months and the due date's around the corner, she's like, just get this thing out of me. I'm like, well, that's kind of how it is. Like when you're writing a book, you're like, just get it out of me. I'm done with it. I need to move on.
That's awesome. I actually just got my first article published in a police journal, and I've always been, I would say, I don't want to say I struggle with writing, but it's not something I enjoy. And I had somebody give me some very wise insights on a persuasive article, and after he gave it to me, it just clicked, and I was like, I can do this. And I think writing a book, like once you start getting in that role, you're like, I can do this.
Do you have any tattoos, Brent?
I do too.
I have 4, and I will tell you, writing is like getting a tattoo. As soon as you have one, you want another. So I'm already starting to plan out my next book already.
That's awesome. I love it. So tell me about the great slapping and the power of mentorship. Like, tell that for my audience.
I wanted to I wanted to show gratitude to my mentors. I wanted to show gratitude to my mentees, because I've learned as much as my mentors over my life as I have from my mentees. One of the purest joys I have in my life right now is being a mentor. And I've had mentors that have been with me for 14, 15 years. And just to see them when I saw them at the beginning and where they are now, that arc, that growth is incredibly inspirational. And you'll hear me spout quotes a lot. And one of my favorite quotes is, happiness is planting a seed of a tree whose shade you will never enjoy. And I consider that my mantra, my why, that I saw potential in somebody and I invested in them, not knowing if I was even going to be around for the payoff, but knowing that I had a part of that growth is why I do what I do. So I wanted to do an ode to my mentors and mentees. But I will also tell you, Brent, I fear for the future of mentorship. I fear the fact that we have an experienced audience and we have an up-and-coming audience. And there's this, and again, I'm speaking in generalizations, but there's this inability or a lack of interest in understanding how to communicate to each other. So they diverge from frustration. And in my experience, I've taught at middle school, high school, college, and grad school level, as well as in the professional world, there is a general disdain for critical feedback in younger generations. Again, to my experience, and it's seen as an attack. And that's the opposite of what good mentorship is about, where it needs to have that critical kind of parts of it. But if everything that you're given is being viewed as an attack, there's no learning. And I was also thinking about AI the other day. It's like, why do I need to learn from somebody that's been in the business 30 years when I can get all my information from AI? But it's not just about a transfer of information. It's about understanding your potential. The AI is going to give you answers, whether they think you can do it or not, or that you're worthy of the information you're getting. Mentorship's the other way around. They're giving you the information because they know it's going to pay off and they believe in you, not just responding artificially to some question you ask.
Yeah, I love that because I mean we talked about this off air a little bit. My experience on receiving critical feedback is kind of jaded a little bit because of a negative experience. But I didn't touch on this beforehand. Was that there was a generational gap as well between him and myself. He was an old school, like, Marine from the 1980s. I don't want to call myself a millennial, but I'm a late 80s baby, and there was definitely still a generational gap there, and I think that played a lot of just how I was grown up in receiving feedback and how he gave it. It was just like instantly like, nope, I'm not listening to this. And good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but that definitely played a role in starting that mentor relationship because I'd heard all the great things. He was just the greatest guy, and for whatever reason, we just never ever clicked. And I'm interested to think about that some more because I think that you're right. The generational me, the younger me, was like, "Mm, man, how do I receive feedback?"
Mm-hmm.
And I've grown. I think I'm definitely still got a lot of work in that area, but I try to be cognizant now when somebody gives me that feedback to just assume, not necessarily assume that's coming from a negative place. It could be coming from a positive place in that
Yep.
you need to improve your performance or whatever it may be. And it's something that a lot of us younger generations, I'll say it, need to work on.
Words are powerful, but the lack of words are just as powerful. I tell a story in my book about a student who, um, incredibly bright, very creative, was about 26. It was in a master's degree. Huge potential. You could see it all. I mean, he just oozed potential. But he would show up to class late. He would turn in crappy work or not turn it in at all. He would sleep in class. He just showed he didn't care at all. And here I'm seeing somebody with all this potential go to waste. So one day during break, I called him aside and I basically said, "Dude, what the hell are you doing? You are smart, creative, dynamic. I've seen your artwork. It's incredible. You have so much potential. Why are you throwing it away?" And this 26-year-old kid starts crying. And I'm like, "Oh my God, I totally made a student cry." He says, "No, no, no." He says, "Nobody's ever told me that. My parents never told me. My high school counselors never told me. In fact, they told me the opposite, that you were worth nothing." And so this kid believed that. He believed that he was worthless. And if you're not talking to somebody and you're not helping them with their potential, or you're giving them that kind of feedback, this kid could have cured cancer. This guy could have made the next Academy Award winning film. This guy could have solved all sorts of world problems. But because you tore him apart and you destroyed his self-worth, because you didn't take the time to see what his potential was, it's a loss to humanity, not just to this kid.
Yep.
So, that's
I uh I think that's a very great thing to say because too often, especially in the first responder world, it is expected of you to just do your job and go home. And so I think it's human behavior though that people want to hear, "Hey, I did something good." And far too often in leaders in their leadership roles just don't convey that message. They just say, "Well, you just did your job and that's fine." And I don't think that's acceptable in today's day and age because that's I mean, when I was in that position, I wanted to hear somebody tell me I did a good job. "Hey, you made a great bust tonight. Hey, you made a great arrest," or "Hey, you handled that a call appropriately. Like, good job." So a small 30-second exchange can mean the world to a younger officer or, medic or firefighter, whatever the case may be. And I think that we have to realize moving forward that, like, that 30 seconds can mean the world to that person that's
Mhm.
underneath you. And, if you don't say it, it can definitely affect you. And how you say it can affect them. If you come in there and say, hey, man, like, you did good today, like, that's going to hit home to them. And, we really need to start implementing stuff like that more often in the first responder world.
You bring up an interesting point, and I mentioned off air that I wanted to really kind of dive into what does mentorship look like in the first responder world. Um, but you said something too that in your world that you have to compartmentalize a lot, right? You
Hmm.
have it just for what you're exposed to on a day-to-day basis. It is maybe that desire to not, because when you mentor somebody, you almost live through things again, right? You
Yes.
recount your experience, you recount this, and yes, there's a desire to help somebody through something, but maybe for their own psychological safety, they compartmentalize that out and not relive that again just because personally they can't do it. I don't ever want to claim that I understand what that stress is like on first responders. So I don't want to comment on that, but I was just curious if what do you think of that?
I definitely think that plays a role into it for a lot of guys, because they do see a lot of things that most people probably won't ever see. And, we may see it 20, 30 times over a career of, death or, bad car accidents or shootings, whatever it may be. And you're right. When you part of that mentoring is kind of reliving those experiences. And I think that they just kind of, I don't want to say kick the can down the road, but they might just put it away in the cabinet and lock it away and forget it instead. And I think that makes a lot of sense, actually, looking at it from my perspective, because oftentimes they don't want to relive those events that they've went through.
Understood. And sometimes in a world where your safety is paramount, and sometimes maybe again, this is just my take on it, that abrupt feedback that you received may save your life versus more of that softer tone, right? And that the outcome of your life saved outweighs how you received the feedback or how it was delivered.
Absolutely. And I truly believe that there is a time and place for both in this career field. Um, if you're in a critical incident, sometimes it may just need to be short and abrupt, and may not come across all nice and huggy. But later on you can follow up with, hey, this is why this was conveyed that way. This is why I said what I said. This is the way I handled it.
That
It's
would be a
not
worth
personal.
$1 million right there with that
Yeah.
that follow up on that.
Yeah. And we often forget about that in law enforcement, you know because we've got another call to go to, or we got to take somebody to jail, and then you get back and, hey, we got another call to go to. And so I don't think that follow up ever happens. But I know in my brain, like I explained to you off air, my negative interaction when I tried to follow up with, I was shot down, because on my end I wanted to make that connection with that gentleman and say, hey, I want your experience, I want your wisdom, teach me. And it never happened.
Is
But
that image of the grizzled detective picking up and putting the rookie under their wing, is that Hollywood or does that exist in your world?
it happens, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad.
Hmm.
Um, I think I just off the top of my head, I know some situations to where it really went very well. Um, because I had another supervisor that was, I would say, probably a year or two left from retirement by the time I started there, and he was never going to go out and do anything proactive. Most of the time, he was probably hiding in a dark corner. But I knew if something big popped off, or I stumbled into a great traffic stop, or we got a big call, he was going to be there to back me up every time.
Hmm.
And I knew when we actually had calls, he was going to handle himself appropriately. He wasn't out there trying to, stir up getting a foot pursuit or vehicle pursuit because he was that close to retirement. But I knew he had my back when it matters. And I
Hmm.
knew he was going to treat me with respect. And so, like, I enjoyed working with him. But then there was other ones there that had been there for just as long that were negative influences on other officers because they basically just allowed them to do whatever they want. And, they were there to tell their war stories. And, yeah, I did this 20 years ago. And, but they didn't actually, they weren't checked in, even when, like, I would consider those two very similar in they were both getting close to retirement. But the difference was the one that was good to me, he showed up and backed me up and, like, made me feel part of the team. And the other one, he was nice to me, but he was also close to retirement. But I never got the connection of he cared about me. It was more so of,
Out of
I'm just here to
duty,
tell my
out of
stories. I've done the job. Like, good luck. And those are such subtle differences because if you look at them in the big picture, they're very similar in how they operated overall. But those are subtle differences that, while I get along with them both today, personally great, like they're both great guys, but how they were as leaders were just subtly different, but they made such a big difference in how I viewed them as leaders.
it's a lot to unpack there, Brent.
Yeah.
So a couple of things, there are some foundational things that must exist in a mentoring relationship. And I talked about the importance of trust. If there is not a mutual and strong trust between the mentee and the mentor, the conversations are not going to work. The relationship's not going to work. The other thing that needs to be there is the concept of voluntary relationships. The mentor needs to be a part of your life as a mentor voluntarily. Now, it might be part of a company program, but if the mentor signs up for the program because they want to mentor, there's where that voluntary is.
Yep.
But the mentee has to be voluntary too. They have to come to the table willingly. If they come kicking and screaming, it's not going to work, right? Yep. So you need that trust, and you need that sense of voluntary thing. And the last thing that is absolutely important is the mentor relationship. The mentor needs to understand fundamentally that the relationship is not about them. It is not there to make them look better. It's not about them to put a feather in their cap that they had a mentee. It is complete investment in that mentee. So because of those three things, I would recommend that you don't often look at your leaders as mentors. I think there are some qualities in leadership that must exist in mentorship and vice versa. But I would encourage you to find mentors that are outside of your reporting relationship, outside where you're not going to get caught up in bureaucracy. You're not going to get caught up in SOP. You're not going to get caught up in discipline from an official standpoint, right? And a lot of times people look towards their leaders to be their mentors because they're hungry for that mentorship, but they may not get it because that relationship was not founded on a voluntary standpoint. Now, I've had leaders that have turned out to be amazing mentors. I dedicate a whole chapter to one in my book. But that I was only on her team for 6 months. We've known each other for 20 plus years. So it was that relationship, that trust transcended that reporting relationship. So, if you have leaders that do that, rock and roll, but don't always go fishing in that pond looking for mentorship.
Yep. And that's something I've learned as I've gotten older. Because like I said, when I was a young cop, I was looking for that mentorship, and I didn't necessarily.
Well, I mean, because they glamorize it in Hollywood,
yep.
Right? You could end up with the training day guy. Well, that's a whole other different story. Yeah. But they do. They glamorize this, take this kid under the wing type of thing. And when you're going in there, you don't know what they're facing. You want to talk to somebody that's been in the force for 30 years that has faced everything, like in the Army too. Are you going to charge up the hill behind somebody that's been in 4 battles, or somebody that's just fresh off the West Point? I've never, nothing. I love West Point. I know
Yeah.
some of my students are graduates. Don't get me wrong there, but that experience part. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Would you want to fly an airplane with a guy that's been about 30 years, or a gal that's been flying for 30 years, or one that's been flying for 3 months?
Exactly.
Right.
I think that a lot of times younger, people in this is profession, especially, they go into it thinking that the person, because a lot of times, especially in first responder world, you're stuck with the same people on the same shift 6 months to a year at a time. And if you're new, you kind of like you said, you kind of just think that lead your supervisor or leader is going to be that mentor, and you go in there with these grand ideas of, man, this is gonna be great. He's gonna show me the ropes. Like he's voluntarily wanting to do this. That
And they
not
call
may
you
not
meat
necessarily be the
or
case.
rook.
Yep. And it's not always the case. And I've learned that the hard way, and like I said, I've had some good interactions where they actually were like, hey, like I want to actually show you things, and I want to do that. But those two are not, you're exactly right. They're not codependent, like like a leader is not necessarily a mentor, and vice versa. And I think that we could do a lot better in law enforcement specifically. Unfortunately, I've never been a fireman, but we need to realize that those are not mutually exclusive. And
You might be, you're onto something, I think, Brett. I really do. And it's you have to mentorship. If you're looking at it intra-organizationally, whether the fire department or the police department or EMTs or whatever, right? And that culture has to exist pervasively in that organization for that real. Now, there might be pockets of individuals that have that why about being a mentor, but if it's not reinforced, if it's not celebrated in those worlds, it's going to be very difficult. So I'm talking about fishing in that pond, right? So if you're looking for that emotional trust connection where they're going to be able to give you feedback appropriately to help you be better and do better and be more and do more, you want to find somebody that has that ability and either is strong in that culture or comes from a culture of that kind of mentorship. And it sounds like, from what you're saying, in those worlds, there really isn't a celebrated kind of understanding of mentorship or reinforcement of that.
oh yeah, there's definitely not on an official level. Like I said, you'll occasionally run into somebody that will voluntarily take you under your wing, but then sometimes, a lot of times, it's more forced. And kind of like you said, it's got to be voluntary.
Be voluntary.
And I wish there was. There are some agencies out there that do have mentor programs,
Mhm.
but those are very few and far between. I truly think that it would be beneficial to get these people in here that want to, give back and teach these people, like, how to operate in this society. And I say society, I mean, it has its own little society, law
Mhm.
enforcement,
Right.
but, operate within the bounds, and like, this is how we carry ourselves. And like, this is, how you interact with superiors. There's no one out there that really does that on a formal basis for the most part. And
Is there a general expectation of a rookie's tenure?
what do you
So,
mean?
so for example, somebody's right out of the academy, all right, and they come join a force. Is there ever a prevailing understanding that, oh, this guy's only going to last 2 years before he goes someplace else, or he's
Oh
not going to
yeah,
make it?
absolutely.
Okay, so and the reason I bring that up, so I grew up in the North. I grew up in St. Louis. I grew up in Milwaukee. Everybody knew everybody. We all hung out on each other's porches growing up. Kids were friends with everybody in the neighborhood. Down here in Orlando, we don't have any of that, right? Like when I first moved down from Milwaukee, I was looking forward to getting to know my neighbors. Nobody ever left their house, mostly because it was like 110 degrees in the summer. But nobody got to know each other. And I learned that because Orlando is a very transient community, people come for a year and then they leave, a lot of rentals in the area. Nobody goes out of their way to invest in getting to know the neighbor, because why? Because they're just going to leave in 6 months, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I asked that question. From a mentorship culture standpoint, what's the payoff for investing in somebody that may only be there 6 months? So when you have that romantic rookie coming off out of the academy and looking for this grizzled detective to kind of take him under the wing, it's not going to happen, potentially because of that perception of tenure.
I think that definitely does happen. Like, I mean, you'll see guys come in and they'll work at a smaller agency and then maybe go to like the highway patrol or something, or may start at a small fire department, then go to like Tulsa Fire Department, Oklahoma City. And I think those threats are always going to be there, but I would say those are exceptions to the rule, and
Okay.
at least in law enforcement, or at least in first responder worlds, because it does happen. But I know from like my agency, like I worked at a mid-sized agency, I guess you'd call it, and the pay was decent. Like it paid my bills. The work itself was like fun. But the only reason I left is because like I just felt like no one there. I mean, granted, COVID was happening, so I mean that was a little bit different. But like, I feel like a lot of guys would just feel a lot better if they had that sense of belonging to the department. Like, hey, this is like the mentor that's been here 20 something years. He knows the culture of the department, of how we operate. This is there's not that at most agencies, and so there's never really a buy-in of like buying into your agency, if that makes sense.
Oh, you hit on one of the most important benefits of having a mentorship program in an organization, is that concept that, hey, this company, this agency is investing in me. They see potential. They see my value. They are going out of their way. And that creates longevity. That creates loyalty. That creates, officers that are there for 30 years because they were shown a path, they were given a path, and they were walked with somebody along that path to get there.
Yeah.
100%. And that works
And
in
I
all
think,
organizations.
and I think, in my opinion, I feel like there was a generational skip of mentorship. And I say that because a lot of the agencies I worked at, I say a lot, I've only been at 3, but
Well, in your world, that might be a lot.
yeah, yeah, it's true.
It's all relative.
But there is an older generation of officers that stayed at a lot of these places for 20, 25 years and never left for whatever reason. But then there's a generation of, people came, they went, they may have went to a bigger agency, they may have got out of law enforcement. And so now there's some of those people that have stayed, like they're not as invested. And then that new generation that's coming through, they don't have that same buy-in as those ones that were been there for 25, 30 years. And like somebody's got to reestablish that link. Otherwise, it's always going to be a revolving door.
That's a great question. I was in that generation where both of my parents worked for the same company for 40 years. And just before my dad retired, his company got bought out. He got laid off and lost all of his pension, and working for the same company for 40 years. So we saw parents work for the same company, and a lot of them for what, right? They got the gold watch at 50, 40 years, and that was it, right? So I think I'm on the end of that generation that kind of saw that. I think we need to change our mindset. And I know I mentioned loyalty for 30 years, but I think as a company, as I'm 55, I will be 55 in July. And I think we need to change our thinking, because I don't think we're ever going to go back to working for a company for 20, 30 years being the norm. That I don't think we'll ever go back there. And so I remember having a conversation with one of my leaders, and we were talking about an internship program. And she's like, I want these people to stay with us for 15 years. And I'm like, it's not going to happen. If we get somebody to stay for 3 years, that is a lifetime for people under 35. That is a lifetime. And if leadership, if the senior people understand that and you get somebody to stay for 3 years, that's a huge win. You might get more out of them, but I wouldn't really set your expectation it'll be on that 3 years. And that's where we see some of that disconnect, Brent, where that established generation is not wanting to invest because they don't see that 10, 15-year officer there. They see 3 years, maybe leaving for a different paycheck, or they didn't like this, they didn't like the shifts, whatever, and they're going to go to a bigger city or a bigger agency. So you hit it right on the nail on that one. But I think our win, and hopefully sharing this out to your audience, is we need to change our thinking mindset.
Absolutely. I actually just had that discussion with my mom this week. And obviously, my mom's from a different generation. But her and my dad worked for the state for 25 years. My dad was a state trooper. And they don't understand that. And, I told them eventually I'd like to be a police chief. And they're like, well, you just need to stay where you're at. And I'm like, that doesn't fulfill what I want to do long term. Like, I love where I work at. But career goal wise, like if I stay there 25 years, like I work for a tribal agency. And so like
Sure.
I'm not tribal, so I can only go like a certain level high.
Mm-hmm.
That's just how they have it set up.
Understood.
But my parents don't understand that concept. They think I should just stay there because it pays my bills, it's steady, and they don't understand me wanting to switch to maybe a different agency eventually and be a chief of police. And they're just like, well, you just need to stay there and do what you're doing. You got a great job. Well, yeah, I do, but at the end of the day, it doesn't fulfill me.
But see, back then, employment was fulfillment. I mean, that was the expectation. You get a job, you stay there for 40 years, you have 2.3 kids, a white picket fence, 2 cars, and maybe a dog. And that was the American dream. I think, not only has that been eroded over the last 20 years, COVID completely shot that to hell.
Yes.
And so why that's important to them, and back then too, if you were in a factory job or even probably in a police officer job, if you had a job as a police officer and your son they're going to take over where you left off, and it was just this constant stream that doesn't exist anymore. That's that is historical knowledge. That is not current knowledge.
Yep, I wholeheartedly agree. So I want to talk a little bit about, before we get too far off in the weeds, tell me about the grit assessment. I took it. I think it's an awesome tool, but I want to hear the Yogi spin on it. Like, I think that it is such a unique assessment that it stands out, and it caught my eye, and I took it, and I was like, this is my type of an assessment for a first responder.
Well,
So tell me, or tell my audience, what makes your assessment different from other ones?
So the embrace the grit was a concept. I had an employee many years ago, and she loved to say, "Good sea captains don't learn to sail in smooth waters; they learn to sail in rough waters." And that stuck with me. I love quotes, right? And so when looking to find what my message was, what my tentpole was for my craft leadership, it was the understanding that I want to take a very craft approach to unlocking people's potential, whether it's an organization. Full disclosure, it had to do with craft cocktails. I'm a big spirits guy, right? So, taking the tweezers and doing all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, that tiki drinks. I love all that stuff. So I wanted to kind of to apply that same level of really intricate kind of design to unlocking an individual's potential or an organization's potential. But then I got understanding, like, okay, but I can't even get started. If somebody is not willing to get roughed up a little bit. And I talked to you earlier, if you're going to put a final coat on a piece of furniture, the last thing you do is you rough it up with sandpaper and you smooth it out to put the final coat on. Well, there are people that are not willing or able to really appreciate that roughing or deal with it. So I wanted to really kind of start there. Before you and I get into a coaching relationship, I want to understand what your level of accountability and awareness is. And so I developed the grit assessment. G stands for get over yourself. That's all it has to do about the ego. Reassess with honesty. So once you're over yourself and you realize, okay, I might have some opportunities, what are the priorities you should look at? What are the truths, the kernels of truths in the feedback you're getting? Invest in improvement. And that's okay. So you know what you need to fix. What are you doing about it? Are you willing to put that time and effort into fixing that? And finally, treasure the lessons in growth. I was just talking to somebody this morning. I said, go smell the roses, but also appreciate the thorns, because you have to appreciate it and celebrate how far you've come. But you also have to recognize the importance of those rough patches that you had, because they are a part of what you are right now. That was the sandpaper that molded you into that fine piece of furniture. So if you can, there's a link. I put it in our chat in the website there. If you want to share that with your learners, feel free to take the assessment, and you can sign up for a 30-minute consultation once you get the results back on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love it because it touches on a lot, especially when you get on your website and you kind of go a little bit exploring a little bit deeper into it. What really stands out about to me, and I think you will appeal to first responders, is it's a no nonsense approach to assessments.
No fluff.
Yep. Most of us don't want to hear the fluff. I mean, there's always going to be the exception to the rule, but we want the straight and hard truth. Even if we may not outwardly project that, sometimes we still do like to hear that. And I like that. How do you foresee, like you said, you've wrote the book, you've got the assessment. Where do you see yourself now, 5 years from now? Like, do you want to keep expanding on that?
Well, I do. And I will tell you, Brent, just on our conversation today, if I can make any type of headway in the first responder world to help build cultures of mentorship and changing perspectives about investing in the younger force members, and creating that environment where people feel that they're being invested in, not just here, read this manual, but a true transfer of not just knowledge but experience, that would be huge. It would be a worthwhile cause, knowing the work that you guys and gals do all the time, right? I'd like to be an evangelist for that. I would like to really spark the fire in people about why this is important, and the damage that we talked about earlier that can happen if we let that divergent path continue to go in opposite directions.
Yep. Because eventually there's going to be a ginormous disconnect.
Oh, huge.
And, you're going to tip one way or the other. And that kind of scares me a little bit. It really does. Like I said, I know a lot of the older officers, through my father, or just, being at some agencies, and then there's, like I said, there's just that shift somewhere in there of the lack of mentorship, whether it be, people leaving agencies and they just not kind of like you said, they just went somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
But especially at the smaller agencies, there is that disconnect in there, and we've really got to do a better job of addressing that moving forward.
Understood. Yeah, it is. I talk about that in my last chapter of my book, and it's my call to action. And I'm bottom line. Look, if you feel you have opportunities, go find a mentor. Don't be passive. Go find one. Be better. Or if you're somebody that has that experience, find an opportunity to give it back and help that next generation. You're not going to be around for it, but who cares? That's not why you're doing it.
I love that.
And I'm hoping that people walk out with that spark. I'm paraphrasing a line in the book, but there's no greater crime than a spark unfanned that could change the world. And
I love that.
Potentially that's what's happening.
So I got 2 questions.
Yeah.
That I want to end on.
Okay.
So one, I want you to tell everybody, because I'm going to put it in the notes anyways, but I want you to tell everybody where they can get your book and they can find your website. But I'm going to keep the last one secret for when you're done, because I found something out, and I've got to end it on a good note.
Okay. My website is craftleadership.net. And you can go there. You can find out about the programs that I teach. You can find out about the keynotes. You can also link directly to the Grit Index assessment from my website and link to my book, which can also be found on Amazon.com. And it's called The Great Slapping, The Power of Mentorship, Real Growth. Man, I'm telling you, it's late night. Real growth, real grit. Can we edit that?
Yeah.
Real growth, real grit, and real results. Thank you for that.
I love it.
And
so here's what I want to end on.
Yeah, end on it. Give me.
You used to be a comedian.
I did.
Tell me, because I was reading the Podmatch notes. Tell me your favorite story from being a comedian.
Oh, I can. And I will tell you that it's actually in my book.
Okay.
The comedy business is cutthroat. When you start, everybody starts in their local area and they grow out. That local area is so cutthroat because there's only so much stage time. And literally people will smile at you, turn around, they'll stab you in the back to get that stage time. I had a different kind of path to professional comedy. I was a musician and I was in a comedy duo, kind of like the Smothers Brothers. So we wrote original comedy music. So we would play bars, but we would also do comedy clubs. We hosted a weekly comedy show in Milwaukee for almost 3 years. Wow. And we ran into a DJ who was also a professional comedian. His name was Dobie Maxwell. You can still find him online. And we went in there doing something completely different. But this guy's like, there's something about these kids, because we were young college students at that time. And he took it on himself to mentor us, to teach us the insides of the comedy business, what to do, what not to do. And incredibly generous with his time, incredibly generous with his experience, and actually got us our first paid gig, which is unheard of in the business. So that romantic 30-year detective taking somebody under his wing, that was my guy. That was my guy. I will tell you my best experience, because he was an amazing guy, funny, but the best gentleman I've ever met. Had an opportunity open for Norm Macdonald at a Hard Rock Live. And Norm, one of the most genuine guys you will ever meet in your life. God rest his soul. But that was a highlight for me.
I can see that. He just seems like a genuine guy. Yogi, it's been my pleasure. You are welcome on my show anytime because you've been a great guest. And
thank you, sir. Thank you.
Guys,
it's been an honor. I really enjoyed our conversation immensely. I really did.
Absolutely. Guys, take his assessment, apply it, and help train the next generation of first responders in having that good mentor in their life.
Amen.